Barbie is 50 years old this year, but she's more popular than she's ever been. We're in Mississauga at My Favorite Doll with Margaret Matsui. Margaret, you have the very first Barbie here.
I do. This is actually part of my own private collection. The number one Barbie is called number one. It's what collectors refer to as the changes in production in the first year Barbie was produced.
Okay.
And this is the one that everybody thinks they have, but probably don't. It was only sold in the southern states. And it never was sold in Canada. The actual first doll to come to Canada was what we refer to as a number three.
Okay.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, they just refer to the production changes as Mattel was improving the doll. So the number one Barbie is significant because she has holes in the bottom of her feet. And they inserted a copper tubing in. And then what would happen is the doll would actually sit on this stand and be inserted. Well, they found that the copper tubing was too expensive. So they cut it out and they went to a stand that went underneath the arms.
Okay.
So the only difference between a number one and a number two is actually the holes in the feet. And it goes on like that. It's just changes in production as they were refining the doll.
Probably not easy to get one of these nowadays.
Number ones are not easy to find. Actually, number twos are actually harder to find, but most collectors want a number one.
Right. So tell us a little bit about the history of Barbie.
Well, Barbie started because Ruth Handler, whose husband was part owner of Mattel, realized that her daughter, Barbara, was playing with paper dolls and seemed to like the fact that you could change the fashions. You know how many fashions would come with paper dolls.
Right.
So she wanted to create a three-dimensional paper doll, essentially. While they were vacationing in Germany, they saw a doll called Bilili. And Bilili was a little bit not really a child's doll, but what she saw was the size and the fact that Bilili came with all these clothes. So
cool.
Yeah, so when she saw it, it was like, okay, this is what I was looking for.
Right.
She came back to the States and they put the team to work and they created what we now know today as Barbie.
And these are all the older Barbies you have, the vintage ones sort of, in your personal collection.
These are a few of my personal dolls. It's just a little sampling of some of the dolls. And I started collecting Barbies, I don't know, 25 years ago.
Wow.
And for me, it's all about recapturing my childhood. I love playing with Barbies as a child. It's the only doll I had by choice. The story I like to tell, because of course I don't remember, but my mom said when I was 3, I was adamant that I wanted a teenage fashion doll for Christmas. And I can remember actually pushing my Barbie in a baby carriage and playing with it like a 3-year-old would interact with a doll.
Right.
But there was something about the commercials and seeing her twirl and all the fancy clothes and the gowns. It was really all about the clothes.
Yeah, I mean, and when you look at the older fashions, you can tell now that the clothes have come a long way.
They've come a long way. I mean, Barbie's never been a trendsetter, which is, a lot of people think Barbie sets the fashions, but she actually reflects what's happening in today's fashion world. And so all the fashions you see here are reflective of the late 50s and early 60s, because a lot of these designs would have been done in the late 50s. She debuted in 1959. So you're seeing kind of a collection of how women dressed or would have liked to have dressed. Jackie Kennedy, of course, was a big influence in the fashion world, and of course was a big influence on vintage Barbie too. So you'll notice, like, you know, the red flare coat, very Jackie K.
Yeah, and like we said, Barbie has come a long way. The newer Barbies look much different.
They do, and the interesting thing is, and we'll have to go take a peek at those.
Absolutely.
But Mattel has reproduced a lot of the vintage favorites. So if you had wanted this doll as a child, you can now buy it, brand new.
Really? Wow. So it's not the original, but it looks just like the original.
It does, and it's made by Mattel, so it's swell.
So here are some of the newer Barbies. We were talking about how it's come a long way, and you can see the difference when you take a look at them, the older one and the newer ones.
Well, what's really interesting is that a lot of repro dolls have been done, so we call them repros. They're reproductions of vintage favorites. So what you're seeing now is reproductions of fashions and dolls that were actually produced in 1965, 1961, and so on. It's really in celebration of Barbie's 50th, but Mattel has always done a certain number of reproduction dolls. It's great because if you can't afford to buy the vintage, then you can buy a brand new one at a much more reasonable price.
Right. A lot of people think that Barbie is a negative role model, but you disagree.
I absolutely disagree. Before Barbie came on the market in the 60s, most of the dolls were dolls that encourage little girls to become good mummies, and that's probably the most important role that any woman will take on in her life if that's her choice. But there wasn't a lot of other things other than becoming a good mummy. And with Barbie, she said, hey, you can go to college, you can have a career, and especially in the early days, Barbie put out a lot of books and games and stuff that taught little girl etiquette and manners and, you know, what do you take to a birthday party and how to say thank you and how to write a thank you note. A lot of those kind of polite things that a lot of us have lost over the years.
Those are great lessons to learn.
They are, and that's what Barbie was all about. It was teaching little girls how to become fine young women and letting them know that the world was their oyster. You know, you can do anything, and that's an advertising model that Mattel has had over the years, but it's really true. And Barbie, I think, is a big inspiration for that for little girls.
Absolutely. I mean, here she is as a nurse.
Yep.
Here she is going to space.
Before any woman went to space.
Barbie was the first woman on space.
That's right. And the interesting thing is that Barbie really reflected, like now you look at it and you go, a nurse. She wasn't a doctor back in the 60s. It wasn't until the 70s that she became a doctor. Again, she's not a trendsetter. She's a trend follower. And she reflected the careers of the day. Now today, she's, you name it, she's been it.
That's right.
And the whole idea is that little girls can be anything they want to be.
That's right. And even here are some of the even newer Barbies with these elaborate costumes and the hairstyles. I mean, it's just phenomenal.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head because the number one thing about Barbie, how she's taught little girls, you know, that she's a good role model,
right,
is through fashion.
That's right.
And of course, every famous designer, like, I mean, if you haven't designed for the most famous model in the world, come on. So it's all about fashion, and it's
That's
all
right.
about the fashion play and dressing your Barbie how you want her to be.
That's right. So she can go to space, but she can also look good doing it.
That's right. I like some of the signs on some of the dolls, you know, the repro dolls, like the astronaut one. She says, yeah, I'm a rocket scientist and I have a PhD in fashion. And, you know, it's nice to see Mattel not taking it too seriously and having a little bit of fun with it.
Still making light of it,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Now, the great thing about today's dolls, too, is they really hit on pop culture. So we've got the Twilight dolls, and we've got ladies of the 80s rock stars. There's Lucy, like Lucille Ball. There's Goldie Hawn, Carol Burnett. I mean, Mattel has really embraced that whole pop culture aspect of doll collecting. So it crosses over. People who maybe only collect Star Trek will have to have the Star Trek Barbie.
That's
or
right.
Twilight have to have the Twilight Barbie. So it's a hobby that's enjoyed by almost every demographic you can think of. Age, you know, males, females, all different age brackets, you name it, it's huge.
It's not just for kids.
It's not just for kids.
So if people want to find you, how do they find you?
Well, we're located in Mississauga. The easiest way to find us is to go to www.mfd.net. So like myfavoritedoll.net,
Right.
MFD. And all the information that you need is there, our phone, our email. But we are located in Mississauga, and we are open to the general public.